Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany and welcome to day 2 of the 12 days of Christmas. So if you missed me talking about it before, rather than doing Bookmas or Vlogmas this year, I decided to do the 12 days of Christmas, which I saw Chelsea from Voyage of a Time Wanderer do last year, and it just seemed a lot more doable to do 12 consecutive days of videos rather than trying to do 24. Also, it's towards the end of the year and there's always so many fun things to share towards the end of the year and the beginning of the following year, and included in that is TBRs. So what I want to share with you today is my TBR for my Read or Rid project for the year of 2023. So if you've been around my channel for a little while, you've probably heard me reference my Read or Rid project because I did it this year. I kind of stole this idea from Becca over at Hicks Picks Books. I'll link her down below, but I don't think she is recording videos anymore, unfortunately, which is such a shame because she's wonderful and she's lovely. But I saw her do this and then decided to do it the following year to kind of help reduce my physical TBR. It went really, really well in 2022. It was a good kick in the pants to read some books that have been sitting around on my shelves for a while, or ones that I had absolutely no motivation to read, or maybe was even wondering why I purchased them in the first place. And so I am continuing that into 2023. So I'm here today with my list of books. I plan to do the same thing that I did last year, in that I used Chantel Reads All Day's Read Your Bookshelf Challenge and Books and Lala's Buzzwordathon to help me choose books from my Read or Rid project. So by using a prompt from each of those a month, it ends up equaling about 2 books a month. Hopefully, it didn't always work out that way this year, but I'm hoping next year it will. So I have 24 books here, so that should be 2 books a month. And if I do not read these books by the end of the year, I have to get rid of them. So it's good motivation to try them. And it also made me realize this year which books I really didn't care that much about. I have these split up into categories, and as you can see beside me, I have a very large stack of books to get through. I have a lot of different genres over here, pretty much just about any genre you could imagine. So I will have these categorized by genre, so if you want to skip around, you can. I'm going to start with my one and only sci-fi on this list, and that's The Andromeda Strain by Michael Crichton. I read Jurassic Park and The Lost World in 2021 and loved Jurassic Park. It was one of my favorite books of the year. So I ended up picking up this book at a thrift store where I was able to fill a bag of books for only $1. So I think I ended up getting this for around 5 or 10 cents. I can't remember which. So it seemed like no big deal to pick it up, but I have had no motivation to pick it up at all. I have heard people who like Michael Crichton say that they did enjoy The Andromeda Strain, but that's all I know. Next, I have a decent stack of YA here. Sometimes I get along with YA and sometimes I don't. So I have just kind of a random assortment here. The first one I have here might also qualify as a classic, and that's The Arm of the Starfish by Madeleine L'Engle. Don't know anything about this. I have a weird relationship with Madeleine L'Engle in which I adore some of her books, and ones where I can't stand some of her books. So I don't know which one this is going to be, but it's the only unread L'Engle that I have on my shelves, and so I want to read it and see what I think. Next up is another book by a different author, but it's the same kind of situation where I have loved a book that I read by this author and hated and DNF'd the other book that I've read by this author, and that is I Am the Messenger by Marcus Zusak. So I read The Book Thief years and years ago. I think Claire was a baby or she hadn't yet been born, one of the two, and I loved it. And then I tried to read Bridge of Clay in 2021, I think around the time that I started my channel, and really didn't like it and ended up DNFing it. So I have this one. I don't know what it's about, but I'm gonna try to read it, and hopefully it ends up being Book Thief territory, but it might end up being Bridge of Clay territory. Next up is a book that I'm really intrigued by, but I have not been motivated to pick up on my own, and that's Dear Martin by Nick Stone. This was a library discard book that I picked up at a library book sale, as you probably can tell, and I've heard a lot of good things about it, but I've kind of like flipped through it a little bit and I'm not so sure that the writing style is going to be one that I enjoy, even if I like the message of the book. So we'll see, but it's been sitting on my shelves for over a year and I need to read it or get rid of it. Next up is a YA sort of fantasy / Greek mythology type book, and that's Lore by Alexandra Bracken. I love this cover, but I have heard nothing but bad things about this book. I haven't heard even one person say that they actually really enjoyed it. I've heard some people say that the premise was really interesting, but it wasn't executed well, or that the writing wasn't good. I have heard a lot of really negative things about it. So it's on my list and I am not very motivated to pick it up. Also in the category of mixed reviews is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I have heard some people love this and some people not like it. Pretty sure that this is a fantasy and that's all I know about it. Also, it's giant. It's one of the bigger books on my list this year. And I'm not sure, one of the biggest complaints that I have heard about this book is that it's kind of purple prosy. And that's not really something that typically annoys me. I mean, there is a line, I guess, for me as well, but I don't mind venturing into that territory and I do really like beautiful writing. So that might not be a deterrent for me. Next up, I have a couple of nonfictions, one of which is actually, I think, a middle grade, and that's Farewell to Manzanar by Gian Wakatsuki Houston, if I'm saying that correctly. So this is kind of memoir-ish, I think, about this young girl who is in a Japanese internment camp in the United States during World War II. And I think she was a child / teenager while she was in this internment camp. So this is kind of a record of her time there. I also have the Penskavy Papers by Oleg Penskavy. So this book is intriguing because, well, I'll read the back for you. It says, for years, Oleg Penskavsky provided some of the most valuable information the West had ever received on Soviet activities, and he did so from inside the USSR as a high-ranking member of Soviet military intelligence. So these are like his papers and things that he wrote down, and I think that I'd be really interested in his story, but I don't know that I'm interested in like the format that I think it's going to be in. So I don't know. I love reading about the Soviet Union and all that kind of stuff, especially when Stalin was in power. I just find that really fascinating. So that element of the book appealed to me, which is why I picked it up. But I don't know that I'm motivated to read it, and I don't know, I'm a little hesitant. Next up is the middle grade, and the book that I have next is, I think, my most recent purchase of anything that I have here. I think it's the only book that I purchased in 2022. I believe the rest of these were purchased 2021 or earlier. So that one is Enchanted Air by Margarita Engel. This is a free verse middle grade novel about a young girl from Cuba, but she's living in Los Angeles. And that's all I know about it. I got it, I think, at Half Price Books for super cheap, like less than $1, and it intrigued me, so I picked it up. But I've had no motivation to pick it up. My daughter hasn't cared about picking it up, so it's going on this list. Next up is a Diane Stanley book. That's The Silver Bowl. I think that this is historical fiction, and we have enjoyed Diane Stanley's biographies that she's written in our homeschool. We've read several of them, one on Michelangelo, one on Joan of Arc, and I think maybe one other one, and we've really enjoyed those. So this is a middle grade novel that I've had for close to 2 years, and neither of us have cared about picking it up. This is one of the older books that I have on this list, and that's The Tiger Rising by Kate DiCamillo. It's a tiny little middle grade. I really enjoy Kate DiCamillo's writing, but I've never heard anyone talk about this, and I think this is one of her earlier works. Looks like 2001 is the copyright date on this, so I don't know what it's about. I don't know if I'll like it or not, but it needs to be read. And my last middle grade book is Smailholm by C.L. Williams. I love the cover of this. I think it's beautiful. It takes place in medieval times. The only person I have heard who has read this is Krista from Books and Jams, and she didn't like it, I don't think. So that doesn't really bode well for me. So the next genre is contemporaries, and I think that all these are contemporaries, but I really don't know that much about them. So the first one is The Memory Keeper's Daughters by Kim Edwards. I feel like everyone read this book around the time that it came out, and so I have not. It's, I think, about this family that they have twins, and one of the twins is disabled in some way, and so the father decides he doesn't want it and tells whoever's helping him with the babies to get rid of it, and that person, I think, instead decides to raise the baby. Maybe, I don't know, I could be making all that up, I don't know, but I like the cover of it, so we'll see. Another contemporary on here is people I know have said that this is one of their favorite books, and that's Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple. I have a very not great relationship with contemporaries lately, but I also know that this is not a newer contemporary, so maybe that will work in my favor, but I'm very, very hit or miss with contemporaries, so I am not super hopeful about this. I think that it's about this family and the mom has agoraphobia, and that's pretty much all I know about it. The last contemporary is actually also a translated work, and that's The Elegance of the Hedgehog by Muriel Barberry. I don't know anything about this either at all. I heard someone talk about it at some point and then saw it at a thrift store and decided to pick it up, and that's it. That's all I got. Next up, I have some historical fiction, although this first one on here, I don't know if it counts as a classic or historical fiction. So that's The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I read Never Let Me Go by him as part of my reader read project this year, and I have really mixed feelings about it, and am still trying to decide whether or not I want to keep it because I don't know that I would reread it. So I have another book by him on my shelf, and I have just decided that I'm just going to put this on my reader read shelf for this year and see, hopefully I like it better than the other one. I also have Yellow Crocus by Layla Ibrahim. I actually won this in a giveaway. It was an Instagram giveaway for someone's favorite book of the year in either 2020 or 2021. I can't remember which one. And so this takes place during the Civil War time period, and this young white girl has a black wet nurse who is a slave, and I think it's kind of like about their bond and stuff. But I'm just to be honest, I usually am not super motivated to pick up historical fiction, and I have quite a bit of it on my shelf, and so that's why this one went on there, because it's actually the one that I'm the least interested in reading, despite the fact that I've heard really great things about it. And then my last historical fiction is Peace Like a River by Leif Inger. This is another book that I've actually heard wonderful, wonderful things about, and so I picked it up at the thrift store, had it for a while. I have no interest whatsoever in reading it, despite the fact that I've heard really amazing things about it from pretty much everyone. It's just one of those books that I look on my shelf and I'm like, why are you here? I feel like maybe a book I want to read more could be in your place. So that's why it's going on this list. My last category is classics, and this first book is Inspector Cadaver by, I can't even read the author, Georges Simenon. So this was published in the French in the 1940s, but this edition was published in English in like 2015. So even though it's a classic, it hasn't been published in English for that long, or maybe it's just the specific translation. I'm not really sure. I don't really know anything about it. I was kind of intrigued by the name being Inspector Cadaver, and that's why I picked it up at the thrift store. But there's no way I'm going to feel motivated to read this on my own. I've literally not heard even one person talk about it. I also have Goodbye, Mr. Chips by James Hilton. I've heard that this is a sweet book. It's very short, so it's been sitting on my shelf for years, and I don't feel led to pick it up at all. I also have, I think this qualifies as either an adventure or a fantasy, I'm not sure, but it is a classic. That's The Prisoner of Zenda by Anthony Hope. I remember Kaylee from Luminous Libro talking about this book and how much she really enjoyed it, and I stumbled across it at a thrift store, and it's been sitting on my shelves ever since. I also have The Razor's Edge by W. Somerset Maugham, I think is his name. It's kind of hard to read. So I picked this up at a Goodwill and it's super old. And I actually, when I was flipping through it, trying to figure out how old it was, it's actually signed, which is really interesting, and it's a first edition. I have seen this on quite a few lists of classics you need to read before you die lists, and I have never even heard of him other than that. So this is going on my list because I haven't heard anyone else talking about it, so I don't really know if I'll like it. The last two classics I have on my list, I am kind of dreading reading, to be honest. The first one is Candide by Voltaire. This is referenced in like every French work ever. Any French book that I have read has referenced Voltaire, and usually it's Candide. So I picked it up at the thrift store, like seriously, probably 5 or 6 years ago, thinking I should read this. And then I just don't want to at all. I have no desire to. So it needs to just not take up shelf space, or it needs to be read. And the last book is Troilus and Cressida by Geoffrey Chaucer. This is another book that I'm just like, why did I buy this? Why? I think it was referenced in a C.S. Lewis book or something. And it's poetry, and I don't really like poetry, like epic story poetry. I usually don't enjoy it, and so this is really long. And maybe I'll love it. I hope I'll love it, but I do not have high hopes for this at all. So we'll see if it gets read or if I just give myself permission to unhaul it instead. Well, there you have it. There is my reader read project for 2023. 24 books that I need to finish by the end of the year, and if I don't, I need to get rid of them. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. How is your physical TBR going? Do you have books on your shelf that you have just had for forever and you have no motivation to read them? I'd also love to know, have you read any of these books and enjoyed them? Because there's some of them that I've heard good things about, some of them I've heard nothing about, some things that I've only heard bad things about. And so I don't have super high hopes for a lot of the books on this list, but the same thing happens in 2022, and there were some that I enjoyed. There will be an update video coming for my 2022 list also, in case you were wondering, but that's a different video for a different day of the 12 days of Christmas. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.